All right, you guys, let's pick up where we left off. So it seems like everybody has their cylinder and they grabbed all the vertices and just moved it below the pivot point, so that way when you pivot it, it's not pivoting from the middle. I'm going to go to object mode. It's actually pivoting from the top of the cylinder. If you hit the Z key to undo, you could kind of mess around with it and then just hit the Z key to undo that. So we're going to actually duplicate this, and we're going to make like a chain. Let's do like a upper arm, lower arm, and like a wrist, let's say. So let's duplicate this. So the way you duplicate things is you do Control D, or on a Mac it's Command D, but for you guys it's Control D. So if you have it selected and you hit Control D, you'll see now I have a P cylinder 2. They're both in the exact same spot, but they both match up with each other. The pivot point's the same. So now I could grab P cylinder 2, and I'm still in object mode, and I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'm going to just move it, somewhere below that first cylinder. So now if I rotate the second one, it kind of rotates from that joint. Nothing's been parented yet, so if I rotate the top one, it's disconnected. We're going to parent stuff up in a minute, but...
Wait, how did you duplicate it?
Yep, you just select, so I'll delete this.
Okay.
Again, you hit backspace to delete something. So if you select that first one and you hit Control D.
Oh, Control D.
Yep, Control D. And then if you grab the move tool, you could move it. And if I click off of it and I'm like, where's that second cylinder? Because when things are on top of each other, it's hard to select things. So you just go in the outliner and you can actually click on the second cylinder here and then move it down with your move tool like that. And I'm actually going to make a third one so I could duplicate the second one. So again, I have it selected and hit Control D and then use your move tool and move it down. So now I have 3 cylinders roughly stacked on top of each other. And then to parent them together, if you remember, you pick the child first. So I'm going to pick this last one. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and pick the one above it. And the last one you have selected is green. The first one is white. That just kind of shows you your order of selection. Then you hit the P for parent key. And I'm going to do the same thing with the middle one. So I'll select the middle one. And then when I'm selecting it, I'm only drawing the box around that middle one. I'm not drawing the box around both. I'm just picking that middle one. You can click on it and then hold down Shift, pick the top one, and then hit the P key. So now in my outliner, there's this plus sign next to the first cylinder. That's because there's a hierarchy there. And you can open that up and you can see I have my first cylinder at the top. Second cylinder is like the middle of the chain, and the third cylinder is at the bottom of that hierarchy chain. So now if I want to rotate these, I could grab the top one, I could rotate that, and just like my arm, it's going to grab my whole arm and move it. And if I grab the middle section and rotate it, it's going to grab the elbow and the hand, let's say, if you want to call it that. And if I grab the hand by itself, it's going to just rotate this. And I'm not doing any moving with these, I'm just rotating them because figure your arm, like your arm is not going to move off of your, or like your elbow is not going to move off of your arm. It only rotates from its hinge pivot point. All right, so we had a couple of really good questions, and I want to go over those with everybody because you're bound to run into the same scenarios. So I'm going to just delete my setup real quick. All right, so starting back out again, I'm going to create my cylinder. So I'm going to go back to Create and Polygon Primitives and go to Cylinder. So that's JT, this is where you're at. So there's the idea, this concept of a pivot point of the transform, and that's where the object will move and rotate from. But we want to get that pivot to the top of like that cylinder so it'll rotate in a more natural way, like your upper arm would. Not, obviously not from the middle, but from the top. So the way we do that is we got to actually move the points of the object, because if I just go to the move tool and move this down, the pivot point is just lower now. It doesn't fix our problem that we need to fix. So I'm going to undo that. So this is where you left off. You got your cylinder. You just right click on it and go to vertex. And then you can select all the vertices and just move the vertices down. That pivot point is going to stay where it was. And then I could either change the height of this by going to this poly cylinder and changing the height, or I could grab just these bottom vertices. Or again, in Maya, there's different ways to do things. You could drag the vertices if you want. If you want to get creative, you could scale them and make them like different looking, but go back to object mode. And so now when we rotate this, that pivot point stayed where it was. We just moved the vertices down. So now we could rotate this guy, and it's rotating from the top where we want to rotate it from. So that's the difference between the actual shape, which is the vertices, and the transform, which is the pivot point of the cylinder. And we had another issue pop up where we had, let's say if I delete this guy and I create a new cylinder, polygon cylinder, and instead of moving like either the height of this with like the P cylinder, poly cylinder, and changing the height to like, let's say 6 or 5 or whatever, instead of doing that, if I had scaled it, if I had grabbed this, which you're actually scaling the transform, and you're scaling it up, it looks very much the same, but I'm creating a value of scale in this Y channel. So now when I try to parent things and move things around, it gets a little wonky, and objects might shoot off into space, like by a certain number of units, depending if you have, like if I move this and then we start to muddy up these values. We want to keep these values clean. We want to keep our translations 0. We want to keep our rotation 0 and our scales 1. And any scale we do, we want to do it on the vertices. So that would either be going to this poly cylinder and changing the height this way, or right clicking on it and going to the vertices and just grabbing like those top vertices and moving them up, or the bottom vertices and moving them down, and then grabbing all the vertices and moving that entire shape below the origin so that pivot point's at the top. And let me just fix this here and we'll get back to where you guys are at. So I'll go to object mode, and then again, I'm just going to duplicate this guy. So Control D, drag it down, and then Control D one more time and drag it down. And then now I have my individual cylinders with their correct pivot points, but they're not in a hierarchy. So I could select the bottom one, hold down Shift, click on the middle one. Then I'm not holding down anything on the keyboard. I'm just going to hit the P button. So that creates a parent-child relationship. And now I can see that in the outliner. And then I'm going to click on the middle one and hold down Shift and click the top one. And then again, I'm not holding anything down. I'm just going to click the P button, and we got our hierarchy back. So if I hit the plus sign in the outliner, I could see I have my kind of 3-object hierarchy. And if I pick the top one, it rotates all of them. Middle one rotates the middle plus the end one, and then the end one just rotates by itself. And then if you pick all of them at the same time, it's kind of cool. If you like click the top one, hold down Shift, and click the middle and last one in that order, you can rotate them, and it kind of bends as like a chain. And we're rotating on all 3 axes. So if I zero out the rotations, kind of get it back to its original state and rotate on one axis, we get like this cool like swinging chain effect.
That's probably what's happening.
And this is just that rotation. Let's say I have a rotation of 30 degrees on my shoulder, and then so that moves my lower arm also with it, and then I'm also adding 30 degrees to my elbow, And then so it just kind of compounds down the chain. So we're getting 30 degrees applied down the chain, but it's also taken into an account its parent's rotation, which is also 30 degrees, which is why we're getting like that kind of compounded rotation. It would be the same as if I just rotated the top by itself 30 degrees, then grab the elbow and did 30 degrees here, and then grab the wrist and did 30 degrees. It's just, it kind of looks cool when you do them all at the same time.